Let's get into what the Commissioner Cup is, the importance of it, but why it's also not the end all be all when talking about who had the best season in the SWAC or the MEAC. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer for USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Today's episode is all about the Commissioner's Cup. We're going to look at the importance, what it is, and then we're also going to look at why it's not the end-all, be-all. So that's the beginning and the end of the show. And in between, I'll give you the winner in the SWAC and then the MEAC's own version of that and the winners within that conference. But let's kick it off with exactly what the Commissioner Cup is. I'm going to tell a little funny story in the middle about how there was a point in which I didn't know what the Commissioner's Cup was. And I kind of feel like, depending on how invested you were, I may have looked like a fool at one point with how I spoke about the idea of a Commissioner's Cup without realizing there actually was one. But let's identify what this thing I keep referencing is, because I don't know if everybody knows. I don't know if everybody cares. I don't know if everybody just dives in to know what the Commissioner Cup is at the end of the season, because it's not a lot of times a big broadcasted thing. So the Commissioner Cup is essentially in the SWAC, because the MEAC has their own thing. It's called the All Sports Award, and we're going to get into that in segment 2. But the Commissioner Cup is the accumulation of all, or the culmination of all sports, and you accumulate the points that are given out. There's a scoring system based on where you finish in each sport, and once all of those points are added up, now we say this was the team that had the best season in the SWAC. I think it's a really good thing. I think it's a really positive thing, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And the positive impact comes from the importance of it, because so often, and I'll speak for me and what I feel like I've seen, so often it's football season, what's going on with football, basketball season, what's going on with basketball. And then once those sports are over, once football is over, we move into basketball. Once basketball is over, we're back into moving into football. So it seems like we only really care about those things, but more importantly, we only care about what's currently in front of us. Maybe a little bit different with football. Football gets a little bit of a spring practice. They get National Signing Day, but in the same way, that's still being directly put in front of us. The Commissioner Cup forces us to take off the blinders. The Commissioner Cup forces us to use our peripheral vision. And if we're not using analogies and we're being straightforward, the Commissioner Cup forces people to kind of look at a sport that maybe they wouldn't have looked at, because you see who the winner is. And a lot of times you're like, dang, that school won? Because it wasn't FAMU for the SWAC. It wasn't. When it came to men's sports, in the MEAC, it wasn't Howard. So it wasn't the teams that won the football championship that you may initially jump to in your mind. But let's say a team like Valley won, right? And I'm using Valley because Valley's terrible in football and basketball specifically, right? If Valley were to win the Commissioner's Cup, you'd say, Valley? What? How did they win? And then maybe it would even make you wonder what the Commissioner Cup was if you didn't already know. But if you did know, you'd be like, well, Valley wasn't really competitive in this, and they weren't really competitive in that. So how did they win? Let me inquire. Let me go learn. Let me research what sports. Oh, Valley has a pretty good bowling team. And all this is hypothetical. I don't know Valley's bowling team off the top of my head. Oh, Valley's tennis team has won 17 SWAC championships in a row. Like, I think that the Commissioner Cup is good for that because it forces you to care. If you're going to care about the Commissioner's Cup, then you have to care about all the additional other sports, even if it's only momentary, right? Because you're looking at TSU is a basketball school. I don't get to have a multiplier because I'm a basketball school. My basketball doesn't all of a sudden get to count 20 points, or it's not like that. It's not times two just because that's our specialty, and we like, hey, that's what we do. Football, as big as football is the biggest sport in the SWAC, period. There is no question about it. You can have your preference. I think everybody has, pretty much agreed to that. Football is the biggest sport. Duh. Football in this equation does not weigh more than tennis, even though tennis has significantly less eyes on it. There's many people who couldn't even tell you who the tennis team or who the tennis champion is. I guarantee you, there is very few people who cannot tell me that FAMU won the SWAC in 2023. Very few people. And if you can, you probably don't care about SWAC. Probably don't care about HBCU football, period, because you would have cared about the Celebration Bowl. Like, it's just very few HBCU fans who cannot tell me these things. That's the reason I think that it's important. Now, let me give you my little story about how it's to hammer home how important I feel like the Commissioner's Cup is, but then also laugh at my ignorance. So when I first started the show, I wasn't even a year in. I don't think I was 6 months in. This was May. I had to go back and look it up when telling this story to try to find when this show happened. And I still had the spreadsheet. It was in May of 2022. I had just started the show and I had made it through the spring season. And I was like, who was the best team in the MEAC this year? And I don't remember why I did it because I didn't do it for the SWAC. I didn't do it for the SWAC, but I did do it for the MEAC. And I remember saying it's Howard. And I think the point I wanted to make is that Howard did not perform overly well at football. I can't remember what Howard's basketball team that did that year. For some reason, I don't think they were top 3. I could be wrong, but football was not great that year. And I remember wanting to drive a point home that despite not having great football, Howard still had the best year in the MEAC amongst all sports. So what I did is I made a spreadsheet and I put where every team ended. And I did my own little scoring system. And in that, I said, I just did wherever you placed, and I added those numbers up. And Howard ended up having the best year. If we take men's sports, women's sports, and we just take their finishes. I didn't get any bonuses for being a champion. Nothing like that. I just did you a first place. And I think whatever team had the lowest number ended up being my best team. And it ended up being Howard. And I laugh at that because if you are everydayer from that far back, first off, thank you. Salute. I love you because you've been with me since we were strictly audio. So thank you. And I appreciate that. But you may have looked at me like, bro, that's just the Commissioner's Cup, or that's just the All Sports Award if you're looking at the MEAC, right? And I think that we've tiptoed around it enough. So I think it's about time that we move forward and look at the All Sports so I can define it and start just saying, oh, all sports for the MEAC. But to just kind of lock it all together, I think that the Commissioner's Cup is so important that even when I didn't know that it existed, I still did my own version of it. And that's to just hammer home every single sport. Because if we're talking about the most complete, the most all-around year, that's the best way to do it. You can talk about who's the best in different ways, and that's actually going to be segment 2 about different ways to talk about who's the best. But it's undeniable. If you want to know who had the most complete and the most all-around season, you would need a Commissioner's Cup. You would need an all sports. But like I said, let's stop tiptoeing around that and define that, including the winners in the MEAC and the SWAC, as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is the official ticket sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you have somewhere that you want to go and it's last minute, it doesn't matter. I know a lot of times we feel like they're going to jack those prices up at the last moment. And you know what? Many other places will. But Gametime doesn't operate like that. Gametime instead wants to give you the best prices. They still giving you deals up to the last minute, whether that's a zone deal, whether that's a flash deal, right? Whether that's a priority deal. Like, they have all of these different ways to make sure that you're not breaking the bank just to attend an event that you want to. Doesn't matter if it's a WNBA game. Doesn't matter if it's a concert. Doesn't matter if it's a preseason NFL game, maybe a theater play. Does not matter. They are very versatile, and they allow you to go to anywhere you want to go in your area that you choose. So go to the Gametime app, download it. If you haven't already, download the app, create an account, and use the code Locked On College. If you use the code Locked On College, you get $20 off your first purchase. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. It's the first of its kind, 24/7, all day, every day sports network on YouTube. So go ahead and check out whatever is in the rotation as soon as I'm done talking. Matter of fact, you might fool around and see me again. Just check back in 15 minutes if it's something new. But let's continue with our idea about the Commissioner's Cup, because we're keeping this concept going. We've defined it. I've looked at why I deem it to be a very important and very meaningful award, right? Because it does represent something that is a strong achievement, but who was able to achieve that? Who was able to get that award? In the SWAC, it was Alabama State. In the MEAC, it was Howard and Norfolk State. And I think that's the reason I want to make sure I made this its own segment, because we need to first look at the difference between the SWAC and the MEAC. So the SWAC has the Commissioner Cup that I just spent the last segment going over what it was and the importance of it. The MEAC just calls it something different and divides it between genders. So you have the men's sport who have their own award, and then you have the women's sport that has their own award. The SWAC actually does that too, but nobody pays attention to that. They just look at the Commissioner Cups because it's an accumulation of both. The only difference between the SWAC and the MEAC is that the MEAC divides them into two and keeps them as two separate awards, and they stand out. Both of them stand out. The SWAC divides them into two, has them as their own two awards, but then compiles the total, and the Commissioner Cup is what stands out. It's essentially like, is it like that? No, it's not that. I was going to make a poor analogy, but I don't want to, just so that we can keep it clear. Let's keep it with the SWAC and kind of wrap up our Commissioner Cup talk. So Bama State continues their domination of this award. Over the last decade, this has essentially been the Alabama State Commissioner Cup, because that's how frequently that they've won it. Now, they've only won 2 in a row if you're looking at the last 5 years, technically. So you had Alabama State win this year. They had won the year prior to that. Prior to Alabama State's back-to-back, Prairie View A&M had their own back-to-back. Then you had the COVID year. So there was no winner in that COVID year. So 5 years, you split it 2 even. Let's take out the COVID year and then take the next 6 years so that we can have the last 10 times that the Commissioner Award was actually given out. The Commissioner Cup was actually given out, right? That's 8 championships. That's 8 Commissioner Cups that have gone to Montgomery in the last 10 times has been handed out. This is Alabama State's award. They won the last 2 years prior to COVID. They won the 6 years before that. And even if you want to be real dramatic, you go all the way back to 2011 before you had a team that wasn't Alabama State or Prairie View that has actually won this award. So, excuse me. So, it's been a real domination by the Hornets. They have 8 awards total. This has been around since 1992, and the only school that has had more Commissioner Cups than Alabama State is Southern. And Southern went on a tear when they first introduced this award, and they were winning it year after year after year. Essentially, they went through their own stretch like Alabama State. Alabama State didn't win a Commissioner's Cup until 2012. No, excuse me, until 2014. Whatever that first year of this 8-year stretch I'm talking about was. It's either 2013 or 2014. But they didn't win a Commissioner's Cup until then. They're now at 8. They're now at second all time. Southern had their run at the very beginning. That was very similar to this, but then they've had more time to piece together some here and there. If Alabama State continues along their stretch, it's going to be very difficult to rattle off 4 more in a row, but it wouldn't be the first time that they rattled off 6 in a row, right? It wouldn't be the first time that they've done that. If they can get to a half dozen straight again, they'll be back in number 1. This is actually very strong, and we'll look at how they got there because just like the MEAC, I want to separate our SWAC in the men's and women's and look at how it got there, but and how we got to that large total, I should say. Let's move on to the MEAC. Like I said, there's no Commissioner's Cup. Instead, you just have the Hill Award for the men, and that went to Norfolk State by 10 points. This is all breaking down to Norfolk State versus Howard. And if I'm not mistaken, that year I did my own Commissioner's Cup that I told you about. It broke down to Howard and Norfolk State. But this year it's the Bison versus the Spartans. And the Spartans won the men's award by 10 points, edged them. And it came down to the 4 men's titles. The reason I say it all comes down to these 2 teams is 1-2, 1-2 on both genders. But then specifically, it gets really interesting when you're looking at the men's side. When you're looking at the men's side, Norfolk State was able to take this title specifically because of what they did to Howard. Norfolk State is the best men's program in the MEAC in 2023/24 because they were able to hold off Howard in multiple sports. You look at Norfolk State's championships, they have men's basketball, indoor and outdoor track and field, and then they also have cross country. Howard was the runner-up in 3 of those titles. Had those 3 titles gone the way of the Bison, now you're looking at the Bison sweeping both the men's and women's all sport awards. That's not what happened because Norfolk State was able to hold them off, and that's how they came out with that championship on the men's side. To me, the storyline of them being so close, not only in total points, but specifically in individual sports, makes this a even more interesting victory for the Spartan. Now, when you look at the women, on the women's side, you have Howard, who was able to take the Bethune Award, and that's drastically different. And then after we do this, we'll add up who actually had the most points total. Howard was able to win the Women's All Sport Award because they had 2 championships, which isn't a lot. It's not we won a bunch of championships and that's how we won this award. They won 2 championships, but they were high level in a multitude of other sports. They won that championship, or both of those championships, in track and field, women's track and field. And I think that when you look at track and field, a lot of times you see that transition between indoor and outdoor. So you will see frequently that a team wins indoor and then they go and they win the outdoor as well. The only team that didn't happen with was FAMU. FAMU won women's track and field indoors, and then Alabama State came out and they won outdoors. I hope I didn't get that reversed, but those are the 2 teams who won women's track and field in the SWAC. But every other time, TSU, track and field men, Howard, women's track and field, indoor, outdoor, both of them. Norfolk State, indoor, outdoor, both of them. So you see that. But overall, Howard wins championships in women's track and field. Then they're runner-ups in cross country, volleyball, women's basketball, tennis, softball. That's 2 titles and 5 runner-ups. That's 7 different sports that the Howard Bison have been top 2 in. So yes, that's how they were able to win the Women's All Sport Award. Now, if you look at if they combined them, let's say that Howard and Norfolk both combined their 2 points. I don't need to look at anybody else. Howard was 1 in the women's, Norfolk State was 2. Norfolk State was 1 in the men's, Howard was 2. If I combine Howard's score, you're looking at 93.5. If you're looking at Howard's score or Norfolk State score, you're looking at 91. So they don't have a Commissioner's Cup, but if they did, then it would have went the way of Howard by a 2-point edge. Now let's look at the SWAC because Alabama State won the McGee Jacket Award, which was for women's sports, and the women has really propelled them to their Commissioner's Cup. It's the 2nd year in a row that they won the Commissioner's Cup, the 2nd year in a row that they won the Women's All Sport Award, essentially. 4 of these championships, Alabama State has the most SWAC championships, all gender-wise. They have 4 of them. 3 of them came from the women. Bowling, women's tennis, women's outdoor track and field. And I'm only looking at the postseason titles. That's how they were able to come down with that victory. Now you look at Texas Southern. Texas Southern, they won their first Henry Award for the men's side since 2015. And that track team, the track and field and the cross country team. So if you were putting in work with the feet at TSU, that's what led to this happening. Track and field won indoor, outdoors. Cross country won in the fall. So that's 3 championships. And with that, they were in like a 3, I think it was like either 3 or 4-way tie for the second most amount of titles. Alabama State had 4 titles. 3 of the 4 came from the women's side. That was their bread and butter. For Texas Southern, all 3 of their championships came from the men's side, specifically cross country and track and field. That was their bread and butter for them to be able to win the men's all sport, or better yet, known as the Henry Award. So I don't think that this is the end all be all, though. I think that this is a great way, and I think that it's extremely valuable. However, I wanted to give other ways to look at this because I don't think this is black and white. To me, it's not black and white. To me, this is not something that, oh, well, you won the Commissioner's Cup or you won the all sport, and that's the only thing that we care about. No, I can't spin it that way. I understand people who are a little bit hesitant to receive this award, and I'll elaborate on this as we continue with Locked On HBCU. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. I don't think that the Commissioner's Cup or the All Sport Award is the only way to determine who had the best season. I'll specifically focus on the Commissioner's Cup because it is a more cumulative thing, right? The All Sport Award is men and women's. It's divided. And I think that division actually gives it a little bit more of a concrete feel. But I think that there are phenomenal ways to talk about all around sports, but we'd be lying if we said 365 days out of the year, we care about all of those sports. If we're speaking about being all around, if we're speaking about a complete year by a university, then yes, I think that's undeniable. You cannot speak about who had the best all around year and it not be the team who won the Commissioner's Cup or the All Sports. That's the literal point of the award. But I think where it comes from is, how do we define best? And that's different for everybody. See, the All Sport, the Commissioner's Cup, there's no wiggle room. That's all around. That's the point of the award. You can't debate that award. But I can say what constitute as best to me may not constitute as best to you. We might be dealing with just simply different criteria. And when you have different criteria, you're going to have different answers. So let's look at the other criteria that you could have. You can use the Commissioner's Cup. That is one way to grade it. But the other 2 ways are either A, who has the most championships, or then also just looking at the sports that we honestly care about the most. And I don't say this to be disrespectful, but I think that if I didn't speak on it, it'd be disingenuous. The discourse around the Commissioner's Cup is often related to, hey, we don't care about these sports, or there's more sports. That's more so what it is. It's people backing the Commissioner's Cup. I've actually never seen anyone attack it. The attacks must be happening because I see people defending it, but all I see is the defender saying, it's more than just football. It's more than just, I hear you, and I agree, which is why I find this valuable. But I'd be lying to you if I told you if a university won the football championship and they won the basketball championship, specifically the tournament, and made it to the big dance, I'd be lying to you if I wouldn't immediately say they had the best year. I don't think that if the Commissioner Cup didn't exist, we could still define who had the best year. The Commissioner Cup doesn't exist between other conferences, so I can say this MEAC school had a better season than this SWAC school, but I can't use the Commissioner's Cup for it. There's other ways to define these things. It just is. I'll put it like this. I used an example about Valley because Valley's not good in football, but not being good in football does not disqualify you from the Commissioner's Cup. However, if you didn't have the Commissioner's Cup, do you believe that you could still define what school had the best year? I do. We just wouldn't look at all of the sports. We would look at the sports that we really care about. We will look at football. We will look at basketball. And I think we might look towards track and field. So if we're really being honest about it, the championships that we actually tune into and care about who won. I love tennis. Believe it or not, I used to play tennis back in the day. I do. Right? I enjoy volleyball. I went to those games when I was in college. I think that it's a fun sport. But we'd be lying to ourselves if we talk about these teams and we're not talking, or these schools, and we're not talking about the football teams and the basketball teams first. And I don't say this to disrespect the All Sport Award. I think that this is a great way. That is a great way, I should say, to define who had the best season. I just don't think that it's the only way. And if a school comes out and they win football, basketball, men and women, that's 3 championships in the 3 probably most prominent sports that we really be caring about. I'd probably say they had the best year without seeing the Commissioner's Cup. And I'd feel confident in saying they had the best year because in all of the things that had our eyes, they were champions. But yeah, now as far as track and field, and I think track and field could be on that list. But there's a gap between football and men's basketball, then everything else. There's a gap. But speaking of track and field, you have nationals that start today. Hopefully we can get some winners in the semifinal round in the men, in the women as well. And then I'll be able to come on and talk about some of that during Thursday. I'm going to have a really early show on Thursday, so we may not get to all of the people who move to the finals, but you have the men's semifinals today, Wednesday. And then you also have some of the finals in the long jump. We have a Grambling long jumper who will be there. He'll have his finals as well. Then on the women's, you have the semifinals for all of the track events. So basically, men semifinals, women's semifinals, men's finals, women's finals. And then you'll have some of the field events have their finals in between that. And I think Grambling men's long jump is the only field event from an HBCU. That will happen on Monday. But other than that, take that out. It's very easy. Semifinal, final. That's the way that it goes. And by the time we come back on Monday, we'll definitely have some things to say about that, even if we don't get to it on Thursday. Could have a lot of stuff to talk about, and I will be doing an early show before some of the ladies actually get a chance to participate. So I'm looking forward to it, though. I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. I hope that you're looking forward to the next episode on Friday. Remember, we're 3 days a week. I'll try to make sure that I say that a little bit earlier on the next episode. But until that next episode, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.